Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss why it is that the Conservatives, led by Boris Johnson, are incapable of imposing the measures in a timely manner that they know we need to get through this crisis. But first, if you'd like to stay notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, there are multiple levels of failure in the government that we have in terms of this. We can sort of see the same thing mirrored in the US, but for different reasons, arguably. In the UK, we already know from a report in the Times, and although it is a report, it is a Tory-supported newspaper, that Boris Johnson was uneasy with the government's initial plan. And it wasn't like, normally, if you had a situation where a Prime Minister had to go along with something they didn't really feel was right, you would expect it's because the rest of their ministers were really on at them to change it, because that can sort of happen. The leader, and it's not a negative thing. I don't ever want to call a leader weak for doing this sort of thing. If the rest of their team is saying, no, we should do this, a leader shouldn't automatically go, no, well, I'm not comfortable with that, so we're going to do this instead. It's the fact that even his ministers, or at least the health secretary, as we're reported, didn't like this strategy either. It was a strategy that went ahead simply because of an unelected, paid government advisor appointed by Boris Johnson as well. Not someone with any expertise in anything at all, other than how to con a population. And that's not really what's needed right now. So we've got that level of failure, but ultimately, as soon as Boris Johnson said, look, it wasn't even Boris Johnson. That is the problem with the reports. Dominic Cummings is the person who went, actually, do you know what, lads? That idea I had turned out to be complete rubbish. We need to do the opposite of what I was saying. All right, Dominic, we'll do that then. It's not even like Boris Johnson has gone, this isn't working, Dominic, we're not doing your idea anymore. Dominic Cummings had to change his mind, not Boris Johnson. Absolutely maddening. But we now know that we need to socially distance, keep away from each other, only go to the supermarket once a week to get your shopping. Even then, I would say try and avoid crowded times, but who the hell knows when they are anymore, because everything's all up in the air. Eventually close the schools, close the pubs, stuff like that, except pubs are still being opened. And ultimately, this is all because the government now know what measures we need to take, but they don't want to impose them. So they're suggesting them instead. And now Boris Johnson is throwing a wobbly at the country for not following his advice. He's going, what are you doing? We're telling you to do this thing, and you're not doing it. And ultimately, it's because Boris Johnson and the people around him have grown up with, I think in America you call it a libertarian attitude. But this attitude of small government, that the government should not impact your daily life, that it shouldn't interfere in what you want to do. It's their idea of freedom. Now, I have a very different idea of freedom. I'm not, into... It's an extreme form of liberal politics, you could argue, which isn't for me, because for me, freedom comes with responsibility. And you just accept it. In society, you're always going to get a lot of people that are not going to accept that responsibility, for which you need the threat of removal of those freedoms. Has to be together. Freedom and responsibility have to be two sides of the same coin. Otherwise, you get chaos. We have chaos because Boris Johnson wants to tell people not to go to the pubs, but initially he didn't want to close them down. Now he's ordered them to close, but a lot of them are still opening. They're even businesses that you can prosecute are opening. No one is listening to the Prime Minister. It's almost like it's quite difficult for a Prime Minister who has spent several years telling us not to listen to experts and spent several years lying. And, because that's the thing. His supporters, the people who voted for Boris Johnson, know he's a liar. They don't try and deny it when you say, oh, he's a liar. Oh, yeah, but that's all right. What? Yeah, that's fine. Politicians lie. Or they'll just say, oh, they all lie anyway. They'll just try and excuse it like that. A lot of them do. But ultimately, it's because Boris Johnson and his crowd, his privileged crowd, have grown up with this attitude that you do not take away certain freedoms. even when Boris Johnson is trying to implore the nation not to go to these places, not to crowd, he's saying, yes, I know this is draconian. I know this is really a real serious privation. I'm taking away all your freedoms. When it's not. At the end of the day, he's telling people not to go to pubs and clubs and things like that. That's not a terrible privation. We can manage that. And you've got people being really stupid. Oh, we didn't close the pubs down during the Blitz. We did during the air raids. You know, have people up in the air raids. They were down in the bunkers. I mean, how ridiculous a notion is that? Someone actually put it quite well. They said, I think they would close the pubs during the Blitz if every time a customer came in, they were dropping bombs on everyone else, because that is the situation we have. Anyone, myself included, I've got no symptoms whatsoever, and I haven't had for some time, and I haven't really had much contact with people recently either. And yet, I could be carrying it. Who knows? No one's been tested. No one is being tested. Not even people who do develop symptoms. We have no idea about the spread of this. And the thing is, as a result of Boris Johnson's small government thinking, this thinking about removing government from the lives of people, not only do we not have the social structure necessary to beat this as a society, but he is going to have to impose much harsher measures than might otherwise have been the case, because the scenario is developing as follows. Boris Johnson says, you need to do this thing. The rest of the population, well, not the rest, but a decent enough chunk of the population to cause problems, says, well, we're not gonna. So then he will spend ages, because it goes against his very fibre. Boris Johnson doesn't believe in a lot of things, but he does believe in this government shouldn't interfere in your lives thing. He's been brought up to believe that. It's indoctrinated. And he will drag his feet on ordering any real clampdown. You know, he will genuinely not want to see people being arrested and forcibly confined because they're going out with symptoms or gatherings and things like that. He will have to impose, because the situation at the moment is we have a steeper rise in deaths than say Italy. People keep pointing to Italy, but remember, Italy are ahead. That was another stupid thing that someone had to retweeted on Twitter. Someone going, you said that Italy was 2 weeks ahead of us, and here we are now, weeks later, and they're still 2 weeks ahead of us. Yes, that's how it works. They are 2 weeks ahead of us. They will stay 2 weeks ahead of us at all times, because it started getting serious 2 weeks before us. Someone else had to point out, I'm 3 years older than my brother, and someone else going, rubbish, you said that 3 years ago. This is the sort of stupidity. And sometimes I think it's willful stupidity, because this is the thing. I don't know how many of these commentators are actually genuinely stupid themselves, or how many of it are not stupid, but they know that they're, the supporters of not following the guidance, so to speak, not following the experts, are stupid. But we're going to have a situation where he's been dragging his feet. He's going to have to impose tougher and tougher and tougher measures. And it's going to keep getting out of control, because he's never going to be acting quickly enough. It's always going to be reacting. He announces the pubs closed. The pubs aren't closing. Well, some of them are. Obviously, not all pubs are irresponsible. Many of them are. But a lot of pubs have stayed open, and people have gone to them as well. It's the irresponsibility of the people and the businesses. They've gone there. So he's going to have to crack down on them. He's not doing it very quickly at the moment. Maybe by the time you're seeing this, he will have done that. It's a fast-moving thing. That's the problem. I have to bring these out a day in advance at least. But he hasn't been. And he will have to at some point. But it will be too little too late. So then he'll have to do another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And although I don't want to, be too alarmist, this could end up with troops on the streets. This could end up with troops on the street to properly lock down the country when the death toll becomes too high and the NHS melts, because that's where we're headed. Boris Johnson himself he's desperate now. He's lost control. He's saying to people, if you do not follow this guidance, we are going to have to get tougher. And he's saying it as if he really, really doesn't want to. And yet the tougher he's talking about is still not as tough as is going on in other countries in Europe. In France, in Italy, in Germany, in Spain. where the death toll is increasing. So how much do you think ours is going to increase before the government actually starts paying attention? But the reason why he's dragging his feet, it's not just because he is utterly stupid. It is because he is acting against his very core. He's already had to announce a budget, or his Chancellor has, that actually, when you look at it, is a very socialist budget. He's had to do all the things that he said were bad and the reason why we shouldn't vote Labour. He's doing all those things. Not quickly enough, but he's doing them all. And now he's going to have to go against that sort of small government thinking in terms of imposing more and more, as he would call it, draconian measures. But quite frankly, it would be draconian measures if it weren't an emergency situation, but it is. But anyway, that's the situation we're in. That's why we are going to end up in a couple of weeks' time with a really quite catastrophic set of figures facing us. Maybe then both the government and the people will start taking this seriously. I mean, the only thing, just finally, I will say that I think means that we wouldn't end up with any form of martial law is I think there's going to come a point, because at the moment, because we're not testing and we don't really, the number of cases looks quite low and the number of deaths looks relatively low. A lot of people don't really consider this real. I think there'll come a point when the body bags start mounting up that other people in society will say to others that are going out unnecessarily, can you stop that? In other words, it'll become socially unacceptable to do it, and then the idiots will start to conform, is my hope. But we will see what happens. So anyway, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, and if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details, and until next time, I'll see you later.